Started. Thanks everyone for joining me today. This is Adam Davis in the State 4-H office. My job is as the State Enrollment Coordinator, which means I manage 4-H online, and I create managers and oversee the county managers in 4-H online, as well as the county administrators. Celeste Carmichael's joined us today. She's the Program Development and Accountability Specialist in Cooperative Extension. She runs the system that records federal and SUNY reporting, which includes more than just 4-H. 4-H Online is just for 4-H. Alexa Maley's joined us, and some of the technical stuff I'm going to go over, she's going to delve a little deeper into the programmatic aspects of these things. Let's see if I can advance my slides. Okay, the topics we're going to go over today are group enrollment versus individual enrollment, 4-H online, and the difference with that with a program development reporting tool, the deadlines that are upcoming. I'm going to touch on accident insurance because I've had some questions about that recently. Last year at this time, we had a civil rights review, and I'd like to talk about a few things that the federal government's looking for as a result of that review. And then Alexa's going to touch on reporting procedures, whereas I'm going to do more of the technical stuff, and Alexa's going to talk about the theory. So to begin, a group enrollment, there's no enrollment forms for the participants. That means the code of conduct, the acknowledgement of risk, the enrollment form, permission slip. You can't get all that stuff for these participants. Often it's in a school setting. I had an example the other day where it was a bunch of ESL kids, and their family didn't want to fill out enrollment paperwork. So it's perfectly fine to create group enrollment for them and allow them to get a sense of belonging that way. Often a sign-up sheet is used. In our county, whenever we go to presentations, they have a sign-in, and they're asking for race, gender, ethnicity, residency, and grade for all these people in these group enrollments. Group enrollments has a place for duplicates. A duplicate on a group enrollment is an enrolled 4-H member that this activity is going to count on their record. So if it's a bicycle safety rodeo and you're going to give them a bicycle safety activity on their record, you can also put them on that group enrollment, but there'll be a duplicate. That simply subtracts them from the ES 237, but it does count that activity as part of the group enrollment. Both youth and adult volunteers are counted in a group enrollment. That's not parents that are coming to watch a show or something. That's the people that are actually helping to run the show, for adult volunteers. Youth versus adult volunteers, often the youth that's helping out at the event, if they're an enrolled 4-H'er, this is more of a leadership, citizenship thing on their record than being counted as youth on a youth volunteer on a group enrollment. That's not to say if you have a sibling or somebody that's not in 4-H, they're helping you out with some type of group activity at the fair or whatever, then they're strictly a youth volunteer. All programming that involves youth counts as 4-H programming. We learned this from the civil rights audit. So if there's a kid and he's benefiting from extension programming, that counts as 4-H programming. The individual enrollment, there's the enrollment forms for participants. That's the enrollment form, permission slip, the photo release, AOR, and the code of conduct. So you get a full picture of this youth, all the information that we collect. Often this is tied to club programming, but not always. An example would be career explorations, where you're going to enroll them for that 3-day event so that they're covered under accident insurance, but maybe that's the only thing they do in 4-H this year. So again, often club programming, but not always. The race, gender, ethnicity, grade, that also must be collected or the record won't be saved in 4-H online. Here I go into my projects and activities. I like to see these counted on all youth records. I think of the enrollment history of a youth in 4-H is kind of the resume. When they go to apply for college or scholarships, you can print that out at the county level and show everything they've done in 4-H. Activities do not count on the S-237. Those are shorter term things. I like to use the example of a goat, where the project is raising the goat, feeding it, keeping records, but when you show it at the fair, that's an activity that you've participated in. Both youth and adult volunteers are enrolled, but different forms. So for adult, you don't need their date of birth, you don't need their grade, things like that. Adult volunteers go through the VIPP, so their background screened, their references checked, interviewed, the full enrollment process. So even if it's an adult volunteer that's simply chaperoning at the state fair, you're going to go through that whole process of screening them and getting all that information on them. When a youth ages out and becomes a volunteer, it's a little tricky in 4-H Online. What I'd like you to do is archive the youth record and create a new adult record for the volunteer. That's because if you switch them from a youth to an adult volunteer, all their youth activity is lost in 4-H Online. Hopefully that's not always the case, but for this iteration of 4-H Online, that's an unfortunate side effect of just switching them over. You can upload all their forms in 4-H Online. So the permission slip, the acknowledgement of risk, the code of conduct, that can all be uploaded. There's a field for each of those. There's also the state event permission slip. The big event that begins the 4-H year overnight trip is STAR. So if you send a youth to STAR and their permission slip and code of conduct are uploaded into 4-H Online, they're covered for all our events. You don't have to worry about it if they go to career explorations or the state fair. New this year, PW Wood has said that you can scan forms and upload them in 4-H Online and not have to store them in the county. This is not a checkbox saying I agree to this. This is an ink signature that's been scanned. So if that family wants to scan their forms and email them to you, you can upload them into 4-H Online, and you don't have boxes and boxes of paper that you're wondering how long you have to keep them for. Printing re-enrollment forms always comes up at this time of year. I don't know if this link will work, but I'll get to that when I get to that page. 4-H Online versus the program delivery and reporting tool. 4-H Online is for enrolling both youth and 4-H adult volunteers. 4-H Online is not for master gardeners. It's not for tractor safety educators. It's just 4-H adult volunteers. 4-H adult volunteers in 4-H Online get their own record. Parents that are not active volunteers do not get their own record. Parents are simply a function of the youth's record. When you fill out a youth's record in 4-H Online, you've got parent 1, parent 2, second address. This is for contact purposes only. If they are an adult volunteer, they get their own record. The enrollment data from 4-H Online is into the program delivery tool, both the group enrollments and the individual enrollments. So that's why you don't have to report them twice, because we do some magic behind the scenes here in extension to get that 4-H information in. I believe FNEP is the same way. We like to collect all programming over 6 hours and under 6 hours. The 6-hour rule is for the ES-237. Programming that is over 6 hours goes on the federal report that I collect. It's the magic threshold that counts for the ES-237 only. Under 6-hour programming gets rolled into the PD&R, and that does count for SUNY reporting. And every time I give a webinar, I like to make a pitch that families and club leaders can be allowed to access 4-H Online and manage their own records, which will save you time at the county level. And I'm happy to come out and teach you how to do that, or I have recorded webinars on how that's done.
Hey, Adam, we have a question in the chat. Does taking a picture of a form with a signature equal a scan and send?
Yeah, if it's clear enough, it doesn't matter which format it's in. You can upload JPEGs into 4-H Online as well as PDFs. Ideally, it would be a PDF because we all know that that's going to be a lot cleaner. At this point, I believe I'm going to hand it over to Celeste. Oh, we can't hear you very well, Celeste.
Oops. It sounds like you have a fun voice scrambler going on, Celeste.
We're not hearing you.
It was working.
Okay. Testing.
Much better.
Okay, there we go. Switched out. Sorry about that. Adam asked if I would be a part of this, and I was really delighted to, just to kind of help frame. People get confused between the difference between the data that goes into the program development and reporting tool, which is Cooperative Extension's system-wide collection tool for all of our data. So for your association, all the programs that happen within your association and the area ag teams, all the data kind of goes into that one system so that we have a picture of what happens in a county. And across the state, we can better tell the story of what happens for extension. And the data that's collected is really just 4 types of data that equate to that full picture of the CCE program reporting. And a piece of that really for 4-H, a few years ago, we recognized that we had 4-H educators that were putting their data into what's now 4-H Online. And then we were asking them to put that same data in another system. So for the 4-H staff and for FNEP, any place where we have our staff putting data in, we looked for opportunities to streamline that process for you. So I'm going to describe that and kind of help you know what comes over and what doesn't come over that you have to add in. So the equation that you have in front of you are all the parts of the data that go into that CCE reporting system. Let's see, I'm gonna grab an arrow here. There we go. So the full picture includes indirect data. That's any kind of media, social media, publicizing of any kind of activities you do for 4-H. Doesn't have to be individual press release by press release. There's a lot of details and data on exactly how you add the indirects in webinars and reporting sessions that I do in the fall. So you can talk to me later about what that means and how you do it, but there's lots of ways to do that to simply tell that story. The reason why we collect indirect data is to help associations to think about how to expand the audience. And, ideally you are always thinking about growing your audience, growing the people that are coming to 4-H youth development programs. So that's the reason why we collect it. It's both a tool of helping you to plan and helping you to report and helping us to tell that story. So the second line of that data, or the second piece of that equation, is we collect data about direct participation. So for 4-H, that what that means to you in the language that you're used to is group enrollment and 4-H enrollment. So anybody who directly participates in 4-H youth development programs. And this little ball is green, just to signify that that's the data that comes over from 4-H Online. And in a perfect world, you have put all of that data in 4-H Online, capturing everything that you're doing with youth in 4-H youth development within your association. All right. And then the third piece of the puzzle is outcome data. So you've recruited people, they've come to your programs, and then, a portion of them really have left with great impact and, a significant portion in 4-H youth development. So we call that outcome data. And there's a place in the reporting system for you to, indicate what your evaluation says, like what we can say about our program, how we can tell our story. And then there's a qualitative piece, a success story. So an actual, story about an event, a program, you know, your year-long process for a particular program, kind of whatever you want to tell, the best of the best for your association. So those 4 pieces are data pieces that are required for the annual program report for cooperative extension. But the one piece that comes in from 4-H Online is the direct group enrollment and 4-H enrollment. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Anybody have any questions about that? All right, Adam, I'm going to ask you to move on to the next slide. All right. I think there's one. There we go.
Okay.
So data that's entered in 4-H Online begins that process of, you know, what happens. And so, you know, sometimes people say, well, how do you get the data? Where does that come from? I'm looking at the things that are in program development reporting. I don't know where that information has come from. So I think that sometimes it's hard for us to remember, you know, what you put in. And so one of the parts of the process that we ask our 4-H educators to do, association by association, is look at the data that gets rolled in to the program development and reporting tool and just, you know, make sure that it's the right picture, telling the right story. Part of the reason for that review is because there's magic that happens in between you entering into 4-H Online and then it getting transferred to the program development and reporting tool. And sometimes in that magic, it doesn't quite, you know, there's things that get lost or forgotten. So there was a one time, and it may have been Linda Tripp who noticed, or maybe it was John Bowe who noticed, we only had the girls transfer over when we did the data transfer, and there weren't any boys. It wasn't just one county, it was all of the counties. You know, it looked like data had been transferred over. There was, you know, large numbers and all kinds of interesting programs, but, you know, in the review of that data and a quick review of that data, an association was able to say, hello, I know they were missing something. So that review of the data is super important. Yeah, there you go, Linda. Yep, it was crazy. It was definitely crazy. So what happens is counties enter your activity and event participation in 4-H Online. So, you know, every association works slightly differently, but we always recommend that, you know, right after a program happens, data gets entered so that it's most likely to be right on, you know, your race, gender, and ethnicity information, all the data that you're collecting about the particular event with as much detail as you can, including the name of the event, the type of, you know, the type of event that it was. If you hold the same event in a bunch of different locations, you may indicate that in your data as you're entering it in with a location, just so you can, as you're looking at it later, it makes more sense. It's not just this big giant number and nobody really knows it, you know, what that's all about. It helps you to know that what exactly happened, helps you to tell that story. And data and all of the data that goes in, whether it's 4-H Online or the program development and reporting tool, I feel like it's super useful in being able to look back. So as staff changes, as program committees change, to be able to look at that data and see what it is that's, you know, that happened in previous years is helpful. And the more clear and crisp that picture is by your description, the more helpful it is. So the first step in the process is actually entering your activity and event information and participant data in 4-H Online. So the next step in all of that is, you know, is Adam, you know, is the caretaker and reviewer of that information on the state 4-H end, and then the data gets formatted after the deadline. The data gets formatted as it's needed for importing the data into the program development and reporting tool. And after that actually happens, you'll get a note from me and from Adam, and, you know, probably both of us, usually both of us, that says, hey, data has been rolled over. Please take a moment and review that data. And it becomes part of your county picture. So for Cayuga County, I see Emma is on as well. Cayuga County's picture will have all of those events and activities that happened in CCE Cayuga County. It'll have that, and then you're going to add in things like the indirect data that's not in there, the outcome data, and your success story. So that when you look at the full picture of 4-H youth development in Cayuga County, somebody looking in would have a good grasp of, you know, how you're growing your audience, what kind of activities you're doing, and what sort of successes that you've had. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So it looks like I missed a question that came in the chat, which is, how do you capture one-time contacts at things like open houses? And I can answer that now, and just know that yeah, I've got a number of different reporting webinars and office hours that are on the staff site right now for the months to come. But how do you capture the one-time activities and what I would call tabling? That's considered an indirect. So anytime you don't really have the names and contact information, and so you can follow up with people, it's considered an indirect. So something like an open house, I would consider an indirect, and it would just be captured in those media numbers. I think I may have seen something else come in. Provide examples of outcome data reporting. I think the next slide will actually do that. So Adam, if you could move on. That's a great question though. There we go. All right. Is there a way that you can make that bigger? Okay, back up one slide.
Is that bigger?
It's not, but
We try one more time.
other people may be able to see better than me. Now it's a little bit too big. All right, I think we're just going to have to use this as is right now.
Okay.
So what I wanted to show you, and if time allows, we can, you know, and like I said, there are other reporting webinars and information coming up in September. But what we like for you to do is to, once all the content has been added, that you review the data in program development and reporting. So what this shows you, if you squint, maybe your computer's not as small as mine, but is that what will be listed when you open up program development and reporting. There's a drop down that says search. It's right about there. And that'll show you, and then you can pick your program. So the program in this case would be 4-H Youth Development. And it'll show you all the things that you have entered for 4-H Youth Development, things that have been rolled over from 4-H Online, and the things that, you know, you have added. So under topic, it'll show you your event or activity topic with a description, and it'll show you the number of hours. So club projects, when you look at that list, so you can't, it's hard for me to see on this slide in Zoom, but the list is things that are topical project names, like goats and horses and arts and crafts and things that are typical project names. And then under hours, it shows 6. And so oftentimes when people look at this, they go, I don't remember having a workshop called horses, you know, or goats, you know, but the 6 hours is the red flag that shows you that it's really club. So anybody that had, you know, an individual who had a certain topic listed in their club enrollment or individual enrollment, they would show up under that topic name. So if the topic is horses, and you clicked on there, you would see their name, or you'd see the number of individuals with their race, gender, and ethnicity summarized by club project. So look for that 6 hours, because that's the indicator. We put in this, I don't know what the word that I'm looking for is. We help the system to know that if it's a project, the assumption is that it was 6 hours in time, given this whole 6 hour thing. And, you know, you can change that, because if you go, oh no, everybody that's in X project, really it was, you know, it's really valuable and has more hours. So you can edit that, but we needed to have an hour duration with that. And so we used 6 hours. Does that make sense? Anybody have any questions about reviewing that data? I have lots of tutorials that show you specifically how to review data. And, you know, I've got office hours on Fridays, most Fridays at 11 o'clock, if you needed help with this kind of thing, to help you along. But there's really some good ways of reviewing the information you have there right in PDF. Okay, Adam, you can move on, and if somebody has a question, we can go back. All right, so just a note that the group enrollment shows up as community outreach. So it asks you like what type of topic it is, what type of contact it is. And so the assumption again with a group enrollment is that it shows up as community outreach, which essentially means a workshop, right? And that individual enrollment shows, you know, the club enrollment shows up as an individual with individual enrollment. So you might see the difference there, and I'm just kind of letting you know that that's what the difference is. In PD&R, there's, if somebody was putting in a little, you know, some workshop or a piece of data, they're asked to choose what kind of, you know, what kind of effort is this. And I think the topics are, it asks you to choose between community outreach, individual participation, and oh, there's one other one, but volunteer training. So in most cases, the 4-H workshops that are group enrollment are community outreach. So that's the assumption that we've built into the data roll-in. All right, thoughts, questions? So we ask that data review happens before the 30th of November. And the timeline and the whole reporting timing is tight. The best advice that I can give you, though, is to enter your data in 4-H Online regularly, so you don't feel overwhelmed at the end of the year. And as soon as you get the notice that the data has been entered in, switched over, take a peek, you know, because you may be the one that finds that we have done something something wrong. And we're learning. Really, with this whole rollover of data is intended to help make the lives of all of our staff easier. We don't want to make you, really your time should be spent, you know, on education out in the field with young people, with, you know, with the adults that you're working with. And we'd like for your time on tasks like this to be as limited as possible. So know that we're doing our best to make it happen, but we appreciate the review. And your association gets, you know, review of the data in general is part of association's periodic accreditation review. So your executive director is kind of held accountable for the data that's in there. So just kind of know that's part of the picture. So another question came in asking, are school enrichment programs also group enrollment? And so I'm going to let Adam or Alexa answer that one.
Yes, usually school enrichment is a group enrollment because you're not getting those 4 or 5 forms, but sometimes it's even hard to get race, gender, ethnicity, and residence for those folks. But yes, generally school enrichment is a group enrollment.
Is that helpful? All right, well, feel free to, okay, yep, looks like a chat message came back. Yes, that's helpful, good. All right, so the screen that's popped up now is the outcome screen. So we've talked about the data being indirect, direct, and outcomes, right? So this is the screen where you enter the outcome information. And what you see here, what you'll see when you go to look at your, if you click on the Manage dropdown, which is this first one, let me see if I can grab my arrow again. Okay. So if you clicked on this Manage drop-down in PD&R and pull, when you pull that down, you'll see an option for Outcomes. And then you get to this screen. At the very top, what it's going to show you is a summary of your data. So your adult participants, your youth participants, your volunteers. So you'll see it broken down by race, gender, and ethnicity. And, you know, it'll give you a snapshot, if you will, of who you're reaching in terms of race, gender, and ethnicity. It'll give you a total, so total direct participants, and a total of indirect. So this doesn't give you the details of the information like on the last screen that I showed you, but a quick snapshot, a summary of who you're reaching. So when you look at this screen, at this summary, you can't adjust any of this. It's based on the data that you've already put in. But looking at it will give you, you know, so when Linda Tripp looked at our data, the year that we missed the boys or the girls or whoever it was pretty clear because one column was filled out and the other column wasn't. So looking at this will give you a, you know, if you see that you're lacking any kind of diversity, but you know that you have diversity, well, that's a reason for, you know, inquiry, looking a little bit deeper. If you see that there's no indirects, but you know that there should be, that's a reason to look up a little bit deeper. So I really suggest that you look at that summary of information and ask questions. So the question just came in. Does this include both the enrolled youth and the group enrollment numbers? And yes, the answer is correct. It does. And for enrolled youth, if a young person is enrolled in the poultry project and the horse project and the arts and crafts project, they would show up as that 3 separate entries. And I know that feels weird for 4-H staff, but know that when a grower shows up to 3 different workshops in an area for an area ag team program, they are counted 3 different times. So this kind of puts us in an equal playing field. It's a different type of story that we're telling. It's an activity story as opposed to an individual story, but that's how those numbers, that's how you make sense of it. So when you look at that list of all of the activities and the numbers for all of those activities, if you add them up, it should be this picture right here. So somebody a few minutes ago asked about the outcome screen and how do you add outcomes. So this, in this program outcomes screen that you got to under the manage button, a list of potential outcomes for 4-H youth development automatically appear. And these are the things that are in our statewide plan of work for Cornell Cooperative Extension for 4-H youth development. They were created in kind of a combination of state 4-H staff, some of the program work teams, program liaisons. A number of people have some influence in how these things get created. They're very overarching. They're not very specific. So if you look at them, and I'm going to have trouble reading this, but if you go into the system, you'll see it. But for example, number of participants documented to have something innovations in food enterprises, including production, allied services. I don't know what that one is. That one, for some reason, has producer alternatives, new adventures. So whatever county this was from included producer alternatives and new ventures in their 4-H youth development, which you can do. Like you can look at the specific 4-H youth development outcomes and choose to add additional ones. But let me take one that is more aptly applicable to everybody on the call. So number of 4-H team leaders who led learning experience in partnership with youth, okay? So the idea is that that would be something that you measure throughout the year. And you're only gonna enter that in one time. So as you add the numbers into this particular screen, they are not cumulative. So if you put 4 once and then you put 6 the next time, it doesn't add up to 10. If you put 4 in, the idea is that when you go back there, you go, oh, okay, well, we had 13,000 direct contacts. Let's see, youth participants. We had 4,132 youth contacts, and 10 of them were, worked in partnership with an adult to be a team leader. So that's the information below is cumulative. You should be thinking about what number or what percentage. It should be based on evaluation or your kind of understanding of the full program based on the percentages or the information of, you know, the direct total amount up above. So I always suggest that, well, the reporting of individual direct contacts happens one at a time. The reporting, you know, like while it's ongoing throughout the year, the outcomes should not be done until the very end of the year when you have a better picture. I just think that's an easier way for you to do that. So Adam has moved on, so I'm assuming that means my time is up.
That was by mistake.
Okay, okay. That's all right. I think I'm good unless other people have other questions.
I was just responding to a chat. So the reminders are often coming here for the individual enrollments. It's September 30 before the club year begins. Before September 30th, you can't do any re-enrollments in 4-H Online. And after September 30th, you can do new enrollments and re-enrollments. The group enrollments are kind of in a fluid state during the month of October. You can enter them for either year. The logic behind that is that group enrollments usually come in pretty late, especially for late summer programs. It's often not a 4-H youth development educator. It could be a agriculture educator handing you a group enrollment form that included youth. So you have another month for your group enrollments. And all the PDNR data, is, as Celeste said, is to be in by 11:30. What happens after the deadlines? So after the individual deadline is expired, the current active members become inactive. So to re-enroll them, you need to activate the record again. Current inactive members have been inactive for a year, so those then become archived. After the deadline rolls over, that record is locked and you can't change anything that would affect the ES-237 for the prior year for individuals. So any projects that they did that weren't reported, they're not going to be tied to that youth record for the year. Activities years in 4-H can be edited. So if you have a youth that it says he was in there for 3 years, you can change that to 5 years at any time. And activities can be added as well, since those are not tied to the ES-237. Things you want to do before the deadlines: compare your ES-237 to last year's ES-237. Look for surprises. There's often changes, but they're changes that you're aware of, a loss of funding or something, or a giant new programming. But that's the easiest and quickest check, is to compare the ES-237 to last year's and look for surprises. You want to be sure that all member records that should count on the ES-237 are active. Pending and incomplete members do not count on your ES-237, and you need to go ahead and re-enroll them before the rollover. In 4-H Online, you can use the Data tab, Enrollment Issues, to troubleshoot data errors that can be corrected before rollover. And I'm going to go ahead and try to share that with you. Let's see. I want to share 4-H Online. Okay, can you see 4-H Online?
Yes.
Okay. So the data check I'm talking about is simply clicking on the Data tab and looking at enrollment issues. What you're going to look for is things for the current year. It's a little hard to slip things through here, but occasionally you do have things that slip through here, and the system is telling you that that's an enrollment issue and it's going to affect your ES-237. In this case, it's saying this delivery mode does not count. It's an administrative organizational unit. So this is a 4-H Fair Advisory Committee. I'm thinking this is probably an under 6-hour program, so it was put in this delivery mode on purpose, but this is a good quick check at the end of the year. While I'm here, for your inactive inactive or incomplete members, you can search those really quickly, and that'll show you who is not going to show up on your ES 237. Again, just another quick check at the end of the year to make sure what's in there is what you're expecting to see. Okay. You might want to remove families without members, because those are just going to clutter up your data. There's a quick report in 4-H Online to identify those families without members. You can locate them on the search screen and then delete the family. So if it's somebody that was thinking about enrolling, but you never got their paperwork for, they never got around to it, it's a good idea just to clean that record out of the system so it doesn't go forward into the next year. I'll stop there. Is there any questions? All right, another question that I'm recently been getting asked about is accident insurance. Accident insurance is really low cost for 4-H. The way it works is that the family's insurance kicks in first, and if there's lapses in their insurance, then if they're at a 4-H event, they have their acknowledgement of risk and all that stuff signed, then the 4-H insurance kicks in. It's really cheap at 33 cents each. So do not fear adding 100 kids because your insurance will go up, because it's really kind of negligible. Horse contacts are a little more expensive. We know there's a lot of risk around horses. Those are $1.36 each, and 33 cents is not subtracted. So that's 33 cents plus $1.36 because they were in contact with horses. Special interests are really cheap. They're less than a nickel a piece. The thing with special interest is the insurer doesn't want to mess with anything under $50. So if you have one special interest kid, it's going to be $50. If you have 300, it's going to be, 4.4 cents each.
Adam, there was a question around adding animal project information into 4-H Online. Can you give us an update on that?
The animals and the breeds are all in there. So if you want to dive into that, you're more than welcome to. Animals, it's a big task to manage them in 4-H Online. There's a lot of different things with their shots, the dates of their shots, but myself and Dana Palmer went through 4-H Online and identified all the breeds. We put everything that New York State requires for their fairs into 4-H Online. So if you want to use 4-H Online for animals, you're more than welcome to do that. The caveat is that if you're using fair entry, the state fair will not consider fair entry. They are stuck with show works, and so are we until they have a change of heart. So fair entry is a wonderful program for your county. It integrates with 4-H Online nicely, but you're not going to be able just to roll them into the state fair electronically, unfortunately. Okay, the Civil Rights Review in 4-H. They caught on really quickly that there was a lot of clubs in New York State that didn't have 5 or more members from 3 different families. This is an old, long-standing rule. My personal feeling is that if it's 2 families and you're giving kids a sense of belonging, I feel like you should call it a club, but I'm just conveying what was told to us by the federal auditors. 4-H clubs are not gender exclusive. Every club that was all boys or all girls in the counties that were under the federal review, they caught on to that. It was in the report that this club is all boys or this club is all girls. So sometimes it just works out that way. Only girls are interested in that area for your club, but it needs to be open to both genders. With that in mind, if you name a 4-H club the Barnstorming Boys, it's not going to be welcoming to girls, like if it was the Knitting Lassies or something. So when you name a 4-H club, please make it not gender exclusive. Also, when you name a 4-H club, keep in mind that the The little bunny foo-foos might be cute when they're 6 years old, but when they're 16, it's not going to be that cute anymore. And so it's a good idea to come up with a name that will stand the test of time. Chartering 4-H clubs in New York is done through the state 4-H office, and let me show you a couple things about that. Now, if you go to the state 4-H website, and much of the stuff I'm talking about today can be found here, but it's a new site, so I understand that people aren't getting around it as well as they will be in the future. From the main 4-H page, you go to the staff site, and under these programmatic areas, program management is where we put our risk management and enrollment stuff. So all the enrollment things that I'm talking about are here. 4-H Online, all the help sheets I've made. There's enrollment forms for this year and next year, stuff about the data hub as well. But this isn't just for clubs. Clubs has its own area. And under club management resources, there's actually a form that you can use to fill out to get a charter. And it is on this page, right, Alexa? We were just looking at this the other day. Oh, here it is.
Yep, there it is.
4-H club charter request. And I'm gonna have to stop sharing so I can share this. I'm unable to share that document because it's still opening or something, but rest assured there's a document there that you can put your county letterhead on, and it asks for everything we require from a charter. The date of the charter, the charter members, and the charter organization leader as well. The club delivery mode, this came up in the audit as a lot of groups were in the club delivery mode. Our feeling in the state 4-H office is if that delivery mode best suits that, what otherwise would be special interest or group enrollment. If it contributes to a sense of belonging, we feel that that delivery mode is appropriate. But again, I'm just reporting that as a finding from the audit.
Yeah, so that's a really nice segue into what I want to talk about, which is kind of that big picture idea of why we're doing all this reporting and how all the pieces fit together. You know, Celeste talked a little bit about how the pieces fit together from the cooperative extension process, but a few years ago we looked in the state office at what reporting looks like for 4-H across the state and what it means, because I'm sure you guys have heard, you know, what gets counted is what our values are, you know, what we measure matters or whatever. And we wanted to see what kind of match there was between the everyday measuring we do and the values that we want to have for our program. So on the enrollment website that Adam showed you earlier, there's a document called Reporting Procedures, which is our attempt to gather together all of those places, whether it's a national NEFA policy or a Cornell Cooperative Extension rule or an interpretation by New York State 4-H, just put it in one place, how we're thinking about how we tell our story in 4-H and how people are included in our reporting process. So there's a couple things that I want to point out in that particular document that I think are really important. One is that we tend to use the word enrollment in about 3,000 different ways to mean a lot of different things. So like already today, I've heard in our conversation that enrollment means an individual member information in the database. Sometimes people use enrollment to mean they feel that person is connected to the 4-H program and counts as a 4-H'er. So there's a lot of different ways we use the same words to talk about different things. So we wanted to try to clarify that a little bit about how we were talking about these things from the state perspective. So a participant is anyone who's part of a 4-H program. So it doesn't matter how long they're involved, or what kinds of activities they're doing, they've participated, they count as a participant, and we try to keep track of all of our participants as much as possible. And we hope that all of our 4-H participants have the opportunity and decide that they are going to feel like members. And membership is that feeling of belonging and connection to our 4-H community. And that can happen through all the different delivery modes, all the different strategies and connections that we make to 4-H'ers. So enrollment, on the other hand, is the logistical, paperwork, risk management side of how we stay connected with families. And those kinds of decisions, how we enroll people, are often either specifically decided for us by the policies we work under, or practical decisions about what kind of information we can actually get from the people we're connected with and what makes it easiest for them to stay involved. So like Adam mentioned earlier, the current 4-H online system has those two categories. You have an individual enrollment, which people often talk about as a membership side of 4-H online. But that really just means that we can get individual level information from people, or we need to because of the risk nature of their particular activities. The group enrollment side, you have group level information. You just know how many people are participating, general demographics, but you may not have individual contact information or any of that kind of stuff for them. So that's a separate question in our head compared to the membership kind of question. And then the other thing that Adam alluded to a little bit is this idea of, you know, what is a 4-H club and how do we talk about delivery modes? And there's a lot of conversation around this at the national level as well. And we tend to think about it a little bit differently in New York than our auditors tended to think about it, but that's okay. We're a growing program. So the important thing around clubs is if, especially if it's a volunteer-led group, then you definitely want to make sure it has that charter that Adam was talking about before. And clubs may be in any setting, depending on whatever works best for that particular group. So it might be in school, out of school, after school, not related to a school, however we want to talk about it. And then the other thing I wanted to mention a little bit about is the difference between a program, a project, an activity, a delivery mode. We also use those words in lots of different ways. When we think about it in the programming sort of aspect, or in the reporting aspect of our work, a program is that big picture integration of all the activities that a young person is doing in 4-H. It probably includes multiple activities. It may include multiple projects. It might include indirect activities like Celeste was mentioning earlier. It's a big umbrella. And then a project is the topic learning focus aspect of your program. So that's what we report to the national NEFA system through ESP 37. And that's the area that, like at the state level, we define what those projects are based on the national categories and then our specific New York interpretations of them.
Somebody may be calling into our conference phone, but I think is that somebody on the webinar?
Yeah, it is somebody.
Thank you for calling the Suffolk County Farm and Education Center. You have reached the desk of Karen Kazel in the Ag Production Department. I cannot take your call right now, so please leave me a message. If this is urgent, you can call my cell phone at 219-52.
Thank you. Muting was perfect. Appreciate that. And then when we're talking about activities, those are short-term learning experiences, maybe a one-day event. They could be pieces of a project. They could be separate kinds of things. We usually don't keep track of those activities. Those are usually very county designed, but sometimes there are state level activities, and we try to help with the reporting there by adding that information to 4-H Online. So for example, if we can find all the records in 4-H Online, we can add who's participated in Animal Crackers or STAR or any of those kinds of events. So they're in your youth's records. And like Adam mentioned earlier too, they can be used for that young person's resume and reporting sort of goals. And then the last section in this particular guide talks about how we use the data, which we're trying to do more and more because everyone puts a lot of work into this, and we are really trying to make it tell the best possible story we can about what we're actually doing in our 4-H program. So there's lots of different ways that information is used by national partners, state partners, but that you can use it to make program decisions. And we have newer tools like Robbie Neff's data management dashboard, so you can look at your information in new ways to try to give us some extra incentive to spend time making sure that the picture matches what we're doing every day with our programs. So if you haven't had a chance to dive into this, I do encourage you to take a peek at it, ask us questions in the living document so we can always make changes to it. But it's just an attempt for us all to have some common ground about when we say we're reporting, this is what we mean by trying to tell our 4-H story. All right. I also want to mention this is, as a living document, it's something that is always growing at the national level too. Adam alluded a couple of times to the idea that there is a group of people, national 4-H leaders and such, who are looking at 4-H Online. Because it's a reporting tool, it could always be improved. So is this really asking the questions that we're looking at that we need to in order to understand our program the best way possible? So we're always looking to change the structures and ways that we collect that information so it actually reflects what we're doing. And yeah, that's what I have to share, and I'd be happy to answer questions if anybody has any.
I'm sure that goes for Celeste and myself as well.
Absolutely. Actually, I have a question that others might have too. And I had put it in here before, but I didn't write it probably as clearly as I could. You probably have some suggestions of best practices as to when to add certain information, like club projects for individuals. And I can see, I just know in conversations with educators that when people enter that at the beginning of the year, that might not be the reality of what a young person has actually done. So if I'm talking to an educator at the end of the year when they're reviewing their data, they might go, wait a minute, so-and-so didn't do this and that. And I'm like, well, that's the data that was put in there. So I don't know, have you found that there's best practices as to when to put that kind of data so that it is most relevant and accurate?
Well, in 4-H Online, you can change those projects at any time during the club year. To me, it would make the most sense to look at the Secretary's monthly report and any reports you get in from the counties, and as soon as you get those, add them in. Alexa was talking about Animal Crackers and career explorations. Within a week of those events, I have those activities tied to the youth's record in 4-H Online. Now, not everybody has a student assistant that can help them with that, but the sooner you get it out of the way, the more accurate your data will be, I think.
Yeah, and I think too, it depends on how you plan on using the information. By the end of the 4-H year, we want best practice would be for those projects to show us what the kids actually did in their 4-H experience for the year. And I know we used to ask people at the beginning of the year with the intentions that we would change things at the end of the year, but that didn't always work out that way when I was in the level.
I'm seeing Linda's response, which I think is probably, I've seen a few counties do that. At the beginning of the year, the project list information is put in with enrollment, and then she's suggesting at the end of the year, an update on what gets completed. So I know that's been my experience as well. But the question, I guess, is when and have you found, or do you suggest or encourage best practice of kind of going back in and cleaning that list up maybe?
I mean, definitely. We want to make sure that the data reflects what actually happened for people. So before the end of the year deadline, we would like to have those projects match what kids actually did. So if it's easiest, I guess I'm trying to say, you should decide how you're going to use the information. If you plan on using the projects to like target marketing communications or something during the year, it might make sense to have people express interest in the beginning of the year. If you only want to use it to keep track of what they've done and you send all your communications to everybody regardless of what their profile says, then maybe you only need to put it in the system once at the end of the year so it most closely matches what they've done.
Right. Yeah. I'm just, so that everybody knows, if it's just based, if you're putting in information just at the beginning, that's what gets reported. When that data gets rolled over, then the individuals will show up as what they were interested in and not necessarily what they ended up doing. So I think you're right. You got to, counties have to figure that out. And somebody else had wrote in that, in a private message, that when counties allow data, people to enter their own data, or I don't know, can an individual control the data for their family to say which projects were completed or things like that? I'm not really, that's out of my bucket.
Right, they can if the county allows that. So the county simply generates a 4-H online password for them and gives them permission to edit their records. Mm-hmm. A lot of states are doing that. A lot of counties in New York are not.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Another thing that I have done is I have given on our enrollment form, given the recommendation that kids not sign up for more than, I think it's 8 projects. And that has helped to reduce the I hope or I wish list at the at their enrollment time, and helps them to be more specific about what they plan to do. So then by our June 15th date, there are generally not a lot of changes.
That's good.
I have a question. Can people hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, hi. I wasn't sure if my microphone was working. So I'm sharing a situation and asking what would be the best way to report that in the data. I am partnering with an after-school program in a summer school here in the county. This is Juliana, by the way, from Onondaga County. And in the summer school, we are meeting with them for 7, meetings of an hour and a half. And they are not enrolled. It's not a club. And the only way to report that would be through group enrollment, or is there another way that I can report that?
Yeah, it sounds like a school enrichment group enrollment program.
Even though we are meeting with them for more than 6 hours, and is this like only for each curriculum that we are doing, and just
a group enrollment can be just as valuable as an individual enrollment. And there's actually a place where you can put the number of hours in a group enrollment, which you can't do for a project. So a group enrollment is just fine. It counts on the ES 237, and keep up the good work.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for asking that question, Juliana. It gives us one more chance to just remind everybody that, you know, whichever side of the database it's in, whether it's group or individual data, if we're doing high quality positive youth development 4-H, that counts. That's awesome. And the structure of the database is just reflecting different ways that we stay connected with those groups. It's not a value judgment about which one's better than the other.
I have to remember to say that if I get audited again.
Yeah, like I said, we're still at the national level. There's a lot of conversations going on there.
Yeah, I got a lot of suggestions to find ways to increase individual enrollment. That was one of the suggestions from the audit. So, yeah.
Sorry, that can be a really messy situation, and hopefully we'll find a solution that works for everybody. But bottom line, our goal is good, positive youth development.
And there's nothing wrong with you know, suggesting they form a club. In fact, the auditors told us that, you know, when you New York, we get a lot of a more of a diverse audience in our group enrollment. And they said, you know, if you go out and do a group enrollment and you advertise your club program, you might get a more diverse pool in your clubs. So there's nothing wrong with pushing that delivery mode in your group enrollments.
All righty.
Anybody else? I know we're over an hour now. I appreciate everyone's patience. We started out with 17 and we still have 15. So Celeste and Alexa must have done a nice job.
Nice, Adam. I see you trying to duck out there.
All right, well, I'm going to put the recording of this on the enrollment page so that folks that are at FAIR can access it later. But I want to take a minute to thank Alexa and Celeste. We put a lot of thought into this, and I hope it was helpful for all of those that were able to participate today.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
And if I could just put one quick plug in for any upcoming webinars or office hours for PDR reporting, it's in Extension Insider and also up on the front page of the staff site, all of the dates. So thanks for inviting me.